Okay, good evening everybody. I'm Adam Lyle. I run an innovation company called Padang. We're all about just putting startups, entrepreneurs together with MNCs, government, solve problems, develop opportunities. The reason I'm here is that I'm interested in space. I had the great privilege last year of running with Badushi Bhattacharya, who runs Bhattacharya Space Enterprises here in Singapore, one of Singapore's great space entrepreneurs. We ran the NASA Space Apps Challenge for the first time in Singapore last year. And I've done some other work with Lynette and the gang and Rohit, so I'm sort of part of the ecosystem building. So what's really great here this afternoon is that we've got 4 space entrepreneurs. And actually, you don't actually get 4 space entrepreneurs in too many places, particularly in Singapore. Now, we've got 3 entrepreneurs that are actually doing stuff in space, and we've got 1 entrepreneur kind of down on land, putting it all together. So, I'll quickly introduce our first space entrepreneur. Shh. Thank you. Sorry. Simon Gavush from Equatorial Space Industries. Now, Simon is all about creating a platform to get nanosatellites up there. And he's going to come back and sort of tell us a little bit about that. So our 3 entrepreneurs, we've got one who gets the things up there, then moving to Rohit, who runs Celestial Technologies. Once the satellites are up there, he's got a laser system to enable them to communicate at rates up to 1,000 times faster than can be done currently. So they're up there, they're communicating. And then Makino from Astroscale, a fantastic business that's worked out, hell, there's a hell of a lot of debris up there that we've got to clean up. So after this guy has put it up there, Rohit's got them communicating, Astroscale is going to clean it up and bring it back to Earth. So we're going to hear a little bit more about that. And now, the last entrepreneur here that is very important, Lynette, who runs Singapore Space and Technology Association, has been doing that for over 10 years. Now, she started out on a volunteer basis. She came back from the US with some of her buddies, and they were kind of, as she said earlier, space nuts. And so she volunteered. They set up this association. She's stuck with it for the last 10 years. And now she's the executive director, and it's becoming a very important association to gather the ecosystem together, to enable training, to get research, to get corporates, to get government focus on this industry. Now, the industry here in Singapore is still nascent, employs about 1,000 people, not huge industry, but huge potential. The space industry globally is estimated about 300 billion. I saw the Australian Minister for Jobs and Innovation yesterday was talking about it as a 300 billion opportunity. Australia only has 0.8% of that. Now, many of you may have just read recently, Australia only 2 weeks ago launched a space agency. They're targeting 20,000 jobs. So there's great opportunities in space, and these folks are going to sort of tell us a little bit about their experience, what got us here, where they're going, what's next, and of course, the same deal as before. I'm not sure what the instructions are as far as asking the questions, but I guess you got that before. How are we doing the questions? It's Slido or something, is that right? Yeah. So if you've got the app downloaded, you file up the questions, otherwise we'll just go to the floor. So, big opportunities in new space. So, I think I'll start, Simon, why don't you kind of just give us a sense of where it's all come from, how did you, because Simon's actually still at university. So, let's hear about your story.
All right, so I was actually, well, as you said, a space nut since I was a kid, really. I think most people have a phase, it's just that in my case, it didn't really go away. So a couple of years ago, I started to read into the actual technology and the science behind rocket propulsion, orbital mechanics, how do different types of orbits affect mission design, basically all things about how the industry really operates. And a couple of years ago, I actually joined Singapore Space and Technology Association as a volunteer, and that really opened up the opportunity for me to meet people inside of the industry. learn the inner workings of it, ask any questions I had, and really fine-tune my understanding of it. And last year, we have decided to start the company to address the necessity for dedicated launching of nanosatellites, which are basically really, really small satellites, below 10 kilograms each. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's basically it. I'm still in university, and we are in the early stages of developing propulsion prototypes. And hopefully, if things go our way, within the next 2 years, we'll be able to launch things into actual orbit.
Okay, we'll come back and get sort of some more details on what's actually going to happen, what the system looked like. So, Rohit, why don't we go over to you? Sort of, how did you get to where you are? I mean, I know you came together with entrepreneurs first, but perhaps just give us a bit of your background to what got you into space, why you're leaving orbit.
Yeah, I mean, the company did come off from an accelerator which is based in Singapore, originally from London, called Entrepreneur First, or EF. And I met my co-founder there, and we started the company from there. There's a great deal of emphasis usually put on the fact that if you start a company in an industry, you probably have been thinking about it since you were 2-year-old. That's definitely true in my case. I've been thinking about going to space, and it's a child's dream, effectively. But what EF kind of focuses on is the fact that you not only do things you're excited upon, but also focus on stuff that you're good at. Before joining EF, my 4 years I spent in high-frequency trading, trading foreign exchange in RBS. And as part of that, a huge amount of knowledge of undersea cables and networks and how our whole planet is connected is needed. And that brings in the communications aspect of why we are doing and what we are doing here, effectively.
So you got into space via 4X?
Yeah, partially, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
An interesting sort of transition, I would have thought. What about you folks? I mean, you went there right at the beginning, but you've been very close to the beginning with Nobu when he founded the company. So what's the story from your perspectives? Because as I understand, you actually, funnily enough, also come from finance. Now, this is interesting. I was with Goldman Sachs for quite some years, weren't you?
Okay.
So we've got two people who've gone from finance to space. I'm not quite sure what the correlation is there, but something.
Because there's money in space.
There's money in space. You could smell it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Finance matters a lot, yes.
Is the sound all right out there? It's very odd from up here. Okay. It's not clear? Sound desk, can you clean it up?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is it better? Okay, great. Maybe I will start with how this company being kind of set up, I guess. This Japanese crazy guy called Mitsunobu Okada, he actually had a passion for space. And when he was 40, and then his background has nothing to do with space, actually. But when he was 40 years old, he could ask himself what exactly he wanted to do the rest of his life. And he knew about this issue, debris, space debris. I don't know if you know, space debris is like dead satellites or upper body of the rockets floating around and start colliding each other, creating more debris. And then space industry, people are aware, but not much progress happening. So this guy, crazy enough to set up an office here in Singapore, and his mission is really try to clean up this debris. So that was like 2013. And I joined 2014 October, right after, like maybe I was number 3, I guess. I was in fintech, as he said, and it was like really kind of coincident, I guess, how I ended up being here. It's just that CEO, myself, was really good friends, and when he was about to do fundraise, he asked me to join. So first question I asked was, can you pay me? That was the first question I asked. But since then, I kind of joined this crazy company. And then we've been about 5 years, we've been making good progress. And we have a really exciting milestone next year coming up.
Okay, we'll come back and pick up on the sort of progress and where you're going to next. But Lynette, and your story and the space and how you feel now that you're seeing all these entrepreneurs in Singapore and the growth in front of us. What's the role that you see the association playing and the challenges and also the fact that you've been at it for 10 years, it's kind of now becoming legitimate?
Yeah.
It was really amazing. When we started, in Singapore, you don't get caught up with all the moon landing and space missions that the Western economies do. So why would a group of Singaporeans 10, 11 years ago start a space association? We really wanted to create a national agenda to say we can reach for the stars, right? And coming without a space legacy at all, which is good because you have a clean slate to determine what are the things that you want to focus on without any baggage. So the downside is you don't have that culture and the legacy. But the good thing is you can really write your own story, and that is what we wanted to do. And when we went on it, we were very pragmatic. I think we focused a lot on the industry development. We didn't get caught up with, who's going to put the first dog, first monkey, and whatever in space. It's like, what would make sense for people on Earth now without the Cold War to want to be part of space? So business opportunities, talent, education, raising, STEM, which in the recent years has become very important, STEM for the next generation. And also space, as you can see, we get bankers who join. It's a very financially reliant industry. It's very expensive. So a mobile app startup can go to you and earn for $10,000 for Angel. But you don't do that in space. 10,000 gets you nothing. You go for really big money. And then you realize, we start to realize that Singapore, being a very strong financial country, with very good financial infrastructure, was actually very well poised to do a lot of the financing, VCs, and being a politically neutral location, it was easy to get people from various countries to come together to talk. So one thing about space, as Simon would realize, is you are talking about very sophisticated technology, which is a double-edged sword, which has a lot of political implication in many big countries. And that is something a small country like Singapore is very neutral, and there is a role that we can play.
Sure. Although, it was a very expensive industry, but now that we're seeing sort of private industry coming in, what used to be a sort of $100 million exercise, we're now able to sort of, a nano satellite can be at 50,000, you can actually launch it for what, 70,000 or something of that order, whereas previously you might have been looking at a $40 million bill. So the costs have come down, and I guess that's not unlike a lot of the other areas with ICT. It's become democratized in many ways, which is what we're seeing with the likes of Elon and everybody else. But perhaps just onto the technology side, Simon, take us through, because Singapore or around here is not what we originally thought we'd be launching rockets. We always talk very much about, that we talk about the service industries to the space industry, but you're actually going to be in the launch business. So tell us a little about what's involved in your technology and how you're going to do it, where you're going to do it.
Absolutely. So firstly, and that, by the way, answers the first question, Southeast Asia is actually a very good place to launch from for geographic reasons. Because not only we are close to the equator, which it adds some velocity at the launch pad, which is beneficial, but more importantly, it gives us a much broader choice of orbits, much broader choice of what we refer to as inclinations, because it naturally is restricted to the latitude of the launch of the point from which you launch. So in our case, we are close to the equator, so we can do equatorial orbits, we can do polar orbits, and anything in between. It's not the most efficient point for polar orbital launches towards the north, but it's still perfectly possible. India has been doing that for a very long time. French Guiana has been our launch site for many polar orbits as well. And that's why it's actually, from geographic point of view, it's beautiful. And our first selection, our ideal point would actually be from South China Sea, close to, from Indonesian territorial waters. We are in some preliminary talks with our stakeholders in Indonesia. Philippines is another possible place. And Singapore really offers all the building blocks you need to develop launch vehicles. We have the aerospace industry, the maritime, the petrochem, and they all supply the necessary components, really. So the building blocks are already here. It's just a matter of learning how to put them together into a product which makes sense. So our rocket is being designed to carry between 35 and 70 kilograms of payload, depending on which direction we go into, whether it's eastbound or northbound. And This is really to address the need for dedicated services for nanosatellites. If you put a lot of nanosatellites in a single large rocket, like it's currently done, they just all end up in the same orbit, which is great and it's cost effective if you want to send them just for testing. But if you want to have a functional constellation, a functional network of satellites, you have to space them out. And that's why having a dedicated launch on a smaller rocket is actually very, very sensible. And there are many companies doing that right now. I mean, working on it, including ourselves. So the product itself is well positioned considering the product need, I mean the market needs right now, and the location which we have, we can consider quite a blessing because yeah, once the technology catches up, and that's just a matter of time and a matter of directing enough money into it, yeah, we can perfectly well compete with North America, with Europe, with Russia, with anybody. Yeah. In fact, I think we have a good chance in going beyond what we think is possible here.
And what about you, Rohit? How do you feel about the challenge of being based here in Singapore as opposed to relocating to the US? Is that affecting your sort of technology development or your fundraising capability? What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, I mean, what's happened when we started the company, I think this was one of the very first questions that we had in our mind. Like, space tech in Singapore, really? We should just go to the US. Yeah. And what happened was, like, as and when you start doing fundraising specifically in this area, like, as Lynette said, like, you need massive amounts of capital to get started. Traditionally, Singapore has been, you get seed rounds of up to $1 million at max, slightly more than that. Mm-hmm. And fundraising can be a real pain in the ass. The only region here that kind of does that effectively is probably Japan. So we're definitely looking at US, but US is still tied into decades, things that were made at the Cold War time. So things like regulations around ITAR. So these are international trades and arms regulations, and they are still effective today, which is crazy in the amount of globalization that's happening. That was one of the things that actually kept us here effectively. And what has happened now in the last 2 years is that the Singapore government and the VC community here has actually quite stepped up. Mm-hmm. And I think it's in response to the quality of startups that's coming in. So you had all this huge bunch of e-commerce companies that were there, and people were like really demotivated about it. Like, investors were like, really? I mean, like, this is the only thing we need to invest in. Yeah. But now when they start seeing an option of really deep tech companies, us, quantum communication, rockets, cleaning up space, that's something which gets people excited and dreaming about the future and the possibility. Yeah. And I think this is a perfect place to do that. Apart, everything like US, China, India, Japan, Russia, these are all institutional, national institutions which are launching space races. The only 3 countries globally right now which has private space sector and private space companies is Singapore, US, and south of France. And I think these are places that starting to get more and more attract talent and attract companies in the region. So I think we made absolutely the right choice to stay here.
Okay, that's great. And how do you feel about it? Because you're spending time between Japan and Singapore, so answering from both parts of Asia, what makes it good to be in Singapore, what makes it good to be in Japan in the space industry?
Sure. So the reason why we set up here in Singapore as a head office to start with, because of this market neutral country. So this space debris issue can be very, very, it's got a national security issue as well. So for example, we try to build these satellites and they try to capture debris and then, cleaning up, right? But this technology can be used to like attacking some of the active satellites, for example, right? So we have to be really, really careful. So we don't want to cross over any political things to start with, right? So like let's say if we moved our head office to Japan or US or UK, that's where we have office currently. Well, US is coming up, but then there's a color, attached to this, what we're trying to do. So that's why, we wanted to be here in Singapore as a market neutral country and try to cleaning up.
Okay.
Right? But we set up office in Japan as well as UK as well. The reason was back in 4 or 5 years ago, we looked for the talents. We had to hire a bunch of engineering scientists and everything. the pool was much bigger in Japan at the end, yeah, that time. And who, especially that time, those kind of crazy enough to tackle this space debris issue, there's more people in Japan, okay? That's why we ended up opening up in Japan. And then now the UK office, we opened up 2017, February, because the UK government tried to, emphasize a lot of space industry or try to bring it in the economy as well. And there's an interesting kind of grants and program as well. So we decided to open up there as well.
Just while I'm with you, is one of the questions is asking specifically about how do you clean up the debris? Where is it? It was there a second ago. Yes. What's going to happen with it? Perhaps you can explain how you're going to clean it up.
So how we try to clean up is we try to build this satellite. Satellite is about 100 centimeter by 100, about 100 kilogram to 150 kilogram. We're launching it, and then we try to capture, and then using a thruster engine, we try to deorbit bit by bit. We entry point to the atmosphere, it's burned up. So more like suicidal kind of machine we try to build. That's how we try to clean up.
All you need is to put an AI on that. You have a suicidal AI.
Exactly.
Suicidal debris. Lynette, the other question there about regulation, is that something that you'd like to talk about, LEO and MEO satellites? Is there a need for central regulation?
There is.
Can you see it down there? The second question.
Capacity HTS. What are the future
is there a need for central regulation for low Earth orbit?
Yeah, there is definitely. It would be good to have. As we're trying to promote the industry, we get more of these companies, and the low entry barrier points are for the LEO, the nano satellites, and the smaller satellites. And LEO is getting also very attractive even to the big satellite players. So there is a need to actually start to streamline some of this. I think it is something the government is talking to, because in the absence of a space agency, frequency goes to IMDA, then grants go to A-STAR and EDV, then who actually decides on that process where I say, yes, you can or cannot do certain things. So actually it is not, it is absent now.
Well, that's a nice segue. Given that Australia's just launched a space agency, NTU and yourselves have just signed some MOUs with India, not with their similar association to yours. I mean, where is Singapore in the development? I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about should we have a space agency.
Yeah.
To some part, is that part of the dream for Singapore to have a space agency?
To be very honest, it was the dream for SSTA to start the discussion on the space agency, and that was very clearly on our agenda. Over the last 10 to 11 years, with the very fast commercialization of space and how it has moved into the private sector, and Singapore has also been very effective in what it chooses to bet on in space. We have launched 7 satellites in a very short span of 2 years. We've very clearly identified constellation. We've clearly identified technologies we want to invest in. And we've also identified what is the regulation position we want to be in the United Nations. So we've moved very fast on that. And then you ask yourself, do you then need a space agency if what needs to be done is already being done? In fact, we run an annual convention, the Global Space and Technology Convention. And last year and this year, people have come up to me and said, you know what, maybe we don't need a space agency. You guys seem to be doing it well. And 10 years back, I personally went on a study trip to the United States, to the UK, to Israel, and France, various countries to analyze what is required to start a space agency, what is its focus, what is its mission. And these people have now come back and said, maybe we don't need a space agency after all. And you cut so much bureaucracy in the absence of a space agency. So there are good reasons to have it, but then, like I said, we're writing our space story, we're creating our own dream. Then we have to ask ourselves, what is the means and what is the end?
Okay. Just on that, Simon, what about regulatory issues for you? How big a deal is that?
Okay, so launching rockets is a whole different beast. Because firstly, we're looking at liability matters. Basically, there has to be an insurance, and that's typically set by the country that's authorizing a company to launch into space. So Singapore doesn't have the regulations in place. Indonesia actually does, so that's a very good start for us. Philippines are working on it actively. And then comes the matter of coordinating a launch with air traffic, with marine traffic, with all the satellites which are already in space. So you basically have to reach out to every single one of the organizations that handle those things. So in that sense, yeah, having a centralized body like a space agency could actually be very helpful because they could streamline the entire process. Yeah, basically good things are happening in the region. Especially Indonesia was very proactive for a very long time. And I just hope to see the same trend continue. I would like to see more countries join on board and maybe have a joint ASEAN-wide regulatory framework for it. Because ultimately, in our case, we are looking at crossing many different jurisdictions in flight. We're looking at launching from Indonesia, crossing airspace controlled by Singapore, and then splashing down again in Indonesian waters for the first stage. So, yeah, basically, it would be good to have someone coordinate the efforts.
And maybe while we're with you, there are sort of the two questions there. You're responsible, the fourth question, the latest question, for possibly putting more debris up there. And to you, is there any way to, recycle some of the debris rather than it actually being consumed on re-entering atmosphere? How do we get away from putting more up there? I mean,
is that from? Okay,
yeah,
so basically, as Astroscale is working on satellites which are supposed to attach themselves to another ones and deorbit them. I mean, personally, I think this is going to be a government finance operation for most part. I think this is going to be financed from tax money, and it will make sense because space is getting really cluttered at this point. Especially some orbits like geostationary are very difficult to find a slot at right now because there are so many dead satellites over there. So definitely there will be more companies, and I'm expecting to see maybe international collaboration in actually financing those efforts. And the beautiful thing is, those companies will need a launch as well, so good for us.
And what about recycling?
That'd be brilliant if you can do. Maybe like sometime like, 10 years or 20 years time maybe. But at this moment, the best we can do is try to cleaning up. But like, for example, for future plans, right? One of the future plan we have is called the space traffic management. Okay, so like ideally, like let's say if we start collecting, those garbage in the space and then reusing it, so maybe, I don't know, but part of the space traffic management kind of initiative, it would be really, really nice. But it's gonna take a lot of time and then, more.
By the way, we keep track of our own trash, so we have lasers to shoot our satellites down when they are end of life.
Right.
So we clean up our stuff.
That's very good. Now, talk about cleaning up. Astroscale cleaned up in terms of fundraising. I mean, you've raised $53 million, which is pretty extraordinary. So, how were you able to raise such large amounts of money?
It was a quite challenging, long, it's been taking about 4 years now, and every year we pretty much do fundraise. But from the beginning, we kind of try to convince everyone this is a very, very long process. And in order for us to start making revenue, it's going to take like several years, right? So first of all, we have to lay out all the risk involved to investors. It was very transparent to our investors, right? As well as, and then so we had a clear roadmap, why exactly and what's happening, and the transparency as well. So every time we make something, we make progress or something, we try to be transparent enough to communicate to investors what's happening. And then, lucky enough, the good investor kind of bringing in new investors, and then that's how we kind of successfully raised 53 million at the end.
I mean, there's been a lot of money raised in the US over the last 18 months.
Yeah.
Do any of you sort of feel that you're starting to see a lot more interest in investment here in Singapore now? I know we were talking a little bit about it. You were raising for quite a while.
So we closed a seed round in December last year. We haven't announced it yet, and I think we're going to keep it under wraps for a couple more months for that sake. But we, on an average, I mean, it's just, again, a function of the capital you need to get started. Yeah. But on an average, we doubled the amount of seed capital raised by any company in Southeast Asia. So, and that's just a factor of how much money we need to run the corporation stuff. But having said that, we did not only raise from Singapore. Of course, our lead investors here were one of the big VC firms here. But we got people who have backed SpaceX before, people who are like one of the top incubators in the US. We have people who are one of the biggest VC firms in Australia, in UK, and all of these places to come in. And that just clearly shows, A, the amount of freedom and the amount of freedom investors feel that they have in investing in companies in Southeast Asia, specifically Singapore. And B, the amount of potential and the talent that you have here, which is capable of attracting that investment pool into Singapore. I don't think that's possible in a lot of the countries which are surrounding this region, and that's just a testament of Singapore and the outlook it has globally.
Right.
Yeah.
I see one question there. Who wants to take that on? How near or far in the future will we have low-cost carriers to, like AirAsia, to the moon? Anyone want to put a guess on that?
I think that's a question for Elon, right?
Yeah, I think so. He couldn't join us, sadly, today, but maybe next year.
Should I take it?
Why not?
Well, okay, so for low-cost human spaceflight, the situation is really difficult because humans are heavy. And humans require life support systems, which increases the mass further, so you need larger rockets. And to even get it certified for flight, you need to have a certain degree of reliability before you can certify it for manned missions. So that's the first challenge, and that's why no private company has done that yet. SpaceX will probably be the first one. And in terms of pure expenses, well, when you have something of this complexity and this size, you definitely want to make it reusable. So SpaceX is definitely on the very right track, as long as they keep the refurbishment costs low enough, because that's what killed the space shuttle, really. So when, wild guess, I think by 2050, it's going to be quite an okay deal to take a flight somewhere out of Earth. Maybe faster, depends how much money everybody can raise in the industry.
So I would like to tackle that question a bit differently. I don't think humans would like to go to the moon. I think the destination is going to be either Venus or Mars in that sense. What is most likely going to happen is we're going to see full body haptic suits and more immersive VR, which is going to simulate lunar gravity and lunar terrain in that sense and give you the full experience you need. I mean, that's pretty much all you want, right? Like for an average human, most of the time.
I'll still go to the moon.
What's going to happen is, I think, these destinations are ripe for extracting minerals and extracting resources out. Helium-3, big need for that in fusion reactors. And I think that's where the commercial ecosystem, the mining companies and the resource companies are going to go first.
Well, I mean, it's possibly a good one for you, Astro. I mean, if you've been cleaning up some of the technology, obviously it can be looked at mining, because I mean, that opportunity is extraordinary. Badushi talks about the numbers involved in what one could be bringing back, and the payloads there be extraordinary. Just in the final couple of minutes, why don't you each take a crack at what is your big dream for the space industry in Singapore? What would you really like to see happen? Lynn, why don't you start, Lynette?
It's not a big dream, but it's a funny dream. I'm a funny person. When we started 10, 11 years ago, it was like, are we sending an astronaut? Are we, launching our rocket? And fast forward 10 years later, we have people who want to put Singaporeans into space, and it stopped being a joke. It was like, oh, when are we sending the Singaporean to space? And like, oh, actually there is da-da-da-da-da-da. And they go, oh, when are we going to launch our own rocket? And I go, oh, actually there is a student in NUS trying to make that happen. So I stopped being able to laugh off things, and I have to find myself explaining that there is something going on and drawing people into it. And I think that is a really good situation where we are taking things seriously, and it's no longer something, in conversations when I tell people I work in the Space Association, and then they try to tell me a joke, but it falls flat on me because it is becoming a reality.
I think talent. One of the big things that's happens here, as in contrast to, let's say, the obvious example is US, is that the best and the brightest here want to work for the top 4 consulting firms or the best investment banking, present company included. and it falls on a responsibility on companies like ours and people who are sitting on this panel is effectively to actually get the best and the brightest to come out and work on really deep engineering problems, because at the end of the day, that's what matters in the world. This happens very well in the US, where people naturally go towards the West Coast and then plug into the Silicon Valley ecosystem. And I think that needs to happen here. It's starting to happen with Google and Facebook coming here and the whole shift towards tech. But I think in general, the talent here needs to get a lot more excited about engineering companies, deep tech companies, and frontier technologies as compared to just consulting and banking.
Okay. What would your big dream be?
Definitely for like last 5 years or something, this ecosystem in the space industry here in Singapore completely changed. So when we started our company, right, there's not much any other space company, but like last 5 years, so many more, coming, and more to come, I guess, right? So a lot of kind of students who, it's a really good time to be here and explore new opportunity here in Singapore. So, anything could be possible.
Well,
a lot of appetite from investors as well who want to invest in that space company as well. Yeah, so hopefully the whole ecosystem gonna work together.
Simon, a final word?
Well, in a nutshell, I would like us to see a day when seeing a rocket launch on the horizon from the sea is about as normal as seeing a 777 taking off from Changi Airport. Because we have the location and we have the necessary tools to do it. And I really like the space industry in this country to grow into the point when it's as normal to have a job in the industry as it is in aerospace or maritime. And we can definitely do it. It's just a matter of time and effort and a little bit of luck. And we tend to get caught up in satellites because that's where money is right now. But satellites are not a means. It's not the end. It's the means to the end. Mm. And space industry over the next few decades is going to have a lot of interesting things happening. We're talking space tourism, asteroid mining, lots of really cool concepts. And I would like Singapore to be on the forefront of that. Whether it's launching or whether it's extracting materials, there's no reasons why we shouldn't be leading the way, actually. And that's my big dream. I would like us to be the best in it.
Well, and I think what you've all proved that you can, the resources are here, the support's here, both from government, the associations that are here to support the industry. If it employs 1,000 today, if you look at the Australian projections that they could go to 20,000, roughly 5 times the size of Singapore. So it's possible that you could have 5,000 people employed in space here. But at the same time, I think what's really great is when you look at this panel, everybody has come from different careers. They haven't actually gone to space school to go into space, as you all know. That's not kind of the way you get here. But what has driven them all is this passion that most of them have had for an early age, and they've just kept on going. And that's that kind of thinking big, daring to be bold, and just having the vision to get out there and do it. So please join me and thank these great space explorers.